Well, good morning. I'm Dr. Andy Johnson, President of Friends of the Bethel University Library. Welcome to Prime Time at the Bethel Library. Prime Time is a collaborative project between the Friends of the Bethel University Library, faculty development, and many other offices on campus, which celebrates learning beyond the classroom through the experiences and accomplishments of Bethel faculty, students, and staff. You can find a schedule of upcoming primetime events on the library website. Join us on May 11th as Dr. Mark Bruce and Dr. Marion Larson, professors of English, explore neighborly reading, a result of their co-editing of a recent issue of Christian Scholars Review. Right now, we'd like to issue a thanks to Bob Kistler of the TLT team, Teaching and Learning Technology team, and to the Digital Library. Our presentations are recorded and made available to view through the Digital Library. And so, Bob, if you would.
And we would also like to say a very special thank you to Ann Gannon for all that she has done with the Primetime at the Library events. She coordinates with presenters and creates beautiful posters and markets the events and moves furniture best to fit each presentation, does the sound, and about everything else you can possibly imagine. So, Ann, thank you very much.
Surprises. Thank you, Ed. This morning we will be presenting two Friends of the Bethel Library Awards. One, the Connie J. Larson Memorial Scholarship, and two, the Library Research Prize. First, the Scholarship Award.
In 2009, the Friends of the Library organization established an annual $300 scholarship in memory of Connie J. Larson, reference librarian, in commemoration of her service to the Bethel University Library and in celebration of her dedication to the training, supervision, and development of student library assistants. This scholarship is awarded each year to a student working in the Bethel University Library who exemplifies an attitude of service. The 2017-2018 recipient of the Connie J. Larson Memorial Scholarship Award is Ruth Nordquist. Well, Ruth's supervisor, Amy Reinhold, would wish she could have been here today, but she's off at training. But some of the reasons I wanted to give to you, some of the reasons that Ruth was nominated and selected to receive this award. With the transition to Alma, the library's new kind of behind-the-scenes technology, and Amy's increasing involvement with migration, configuration, training, and so forth, she saw herself as very fortunate to have Ruth working in material services. With much of Amy's time spent away from the library, it was comforting to know that Ruth was there to help ease the load. Amy gave her the additional responsibilities of creating records for incoming theses and discarding materials at Millennium, our current behind-the-scenes software, which she has never done with other students. Ruth demonstrated time and again her capability and willingness to take on these tasks. Her attitude in doing routine tasks also never varies, and she is happy to work on whatever Amy has assigned her to do. Ruth can be relied on and trusted to be thorough with details. She has been a well-rounded material services assistant, also learning and handling sales and acquisitions tasks. Amy could not recommend her enough for this award.
Now we would like to present the Library Research Prize Awards. The purpose of the Library Research Prize is to promote undergraduate research throughout the curriculum, and to encourage excellence in student research that makes substantial use of library resources and services, and that demonstrates understanding of information literacy competencies. The second place winner of the 2017 Library Research Prize is Katie Anderson.
So, Katie, please tell us the title of your paper and the course for which you wrote it.
I wrote Siblings by Chance, Sustained by Choice, or Methods of Communication Research.
Thank you, Katie.
The winner of the 2017 Library Research Prize is, well, there he is, Christopher Bengtson.
Congratulations, Christopher.
Okay, and now the official passing of the Library Research Prize trophy from the History Department to the Philosophy Department.
Is this your first time getting it? Oh, because we have it on here, boy. It's like one for you, Paul. Oh.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Christopher will now share with us about the paper and the reflective essay on his research process that he submitted to the contest. His paper is entitled, A Narrative Approach to Forgiveness Amidst Disagreement, written for his philosophy senior seminar.
They're recording it. Really kind of,
I have a.
You're wired.
I am wired. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for attending this ceremony and presentation today. I would like to take this moment to thank the Bethel Library and Friends Committee for the opportunity to present my research and for providing the materials that made it possible. In addition, I would like to thank Dr. Paul Ricoeur for topical assistance and editorial assistance, as well as Dr. Sarah Shady for additional editorial assistance. In studying the philosophy of forgiveness this past fall in senior seminar, I found myself thinking of situations when forgiveness was complicated and less than straightforward. I have encountered many instances where forgiveness was difficult to come by, and these situations seem to be complicated somewhat by a difference in perspective and disagreement. This led me to the topic of my investigation, which was, how does disagreement over the nature of an offense affect forgiveness? In order to better understand this question, I broke it into 3 smaller questions. The first was, why does disagreement occur? How does it affect forgiveness? And how can these situations be resolved? My method of investigation was literature-based, so naturally the library played a central role in my research process. I started my process by topical searches in the dictionaries available both in the Bethel Library and online. And this led me to bibliographical entries, which I used to find authors who wrote on the topics that were related to my question. After I searched the library for books and databases for journals, I used ClickNet to find additional resources. I started my research around forgiveness, ethics, and narrative theory, where I found Paul Ricoeur's work particularly illuminating and useful. Journal articles pointed me to more sources where narrative identity theories and discourse between people were examined in greater depth. It is at this point where I found the works of Jürgen Habermas and discourse ethics, which informed much of the resolution that takes place in my paper. I would like to thank the library again for making so many resources available and making my research and paper possible. Now, to answer my central question, I first needed a model or a framework of forgiveness to work with. Even though the term is fairly common in its use, especially to those of us familiar with and involved in Judeo-Christian situations, affiliations, and institutions, there seems to be a lack of coherence in our day-to-day usage. We use the term to mean things like excuse, pardon, justification, or a whole other breadth of things, including using phrases like forgive and forget, which seems to confuse our conversation around the topic. One of the key components of philosophy is the attempt to come up with clear definitions or explanations of concepts. And what was clear early on in my examination of the literature was that we were lacking in a clear conception of what forgiveness actually entails. This moved me to consider the most ideal cases of forgiveness that I have encountered myself. And the ones that I felt were most robust were the situations where there was a certain two-way exchange between the wrongdoer and the wronged party. Now, the wrongdoer apologizes and attempts to make things right, so to speak, and the wronged offers forgiveness on grounds of these moves made by the wrongdoer. Now, there are many situations that do not follow these ideal situations, but for sake of simplicity, I will focus on the situations where both parties are present and wish for some form of resolution to the conflict at hand. In my initial readings, I found Charles Griswold's model to be the most compelling one available. It is rather detailed, so I will only share some of the key points here. Griswold's model involves conditions for both the wronged and wrongdoer to follow, framing forgiveness as both a transaction and a process. In this model, the wrongdoer must express regret, show willingness to make amends, accept responsibility for their actions, make a commitment to not repeat the offense. The wronged in response must forswear revenge, moderate resentment with the goal of its eventual termination, and reframe the wrongdoer in light of their commitment to change and not repeat the offense. With this model in mind, it is possible to see why disagreement may prevent forgiveness from taking place. First, the moves by both the wronged and the wrongdoer become misdirected. They will both direct their moves to the event as they perceive it, which results in them being directed at essentially two different events. This will result in the conditions not being made, which makes the wrongdoer conditionally unforgivable. Until some agreement can be reached, the wrongdoer does not become forgivable in the sense of having the potential for being forgiven. It is here that narrative theory becomes useful for sake of examination. I interacted here primarily with Paul Ricoeur's work on narrative, drawing from his masterwork, Time and Narrative. Central to this work is the idea that time is narrated. The idea behind this is that since we exist temporally and construct narratives about ourselves, time becomes narrated. We experience time as we narrate it. Additionally, Ricoeur notes that we make sense of both our lives and ourselves through the use of narratives. The primary driver of these narratives is plot, which we construct, and this plot makes our narratives followable. Since we live with narratives, we continuously construct and amend them as we live. What follows is a process that Ricoeur calls implotment, that is, placing the event within the narrative in a manner that keeps the narrative followable. We interpret events through the narrative that we have constructed, but we also amend our narrative to make sense of the events that happen. However, there are some complications as a result of how we use narratives. First of all, we will not be able to fit every event in our narrative in a cohesive manner. Secondly, as other people begin to enter our narratives, since we exist in relation to other people and cannot seem to escape having to face the reality of being surrounded by multitudes, we begin to construct narrative understandings of other people as well. Unfortunately, our understanding of other people is even more limited than our own. We do not have access to their subjective thoughts or feelings at all times, as I'm sure everyone here is aware of. And we also do not have full access to the narrative that they have constructed for themselves. These factors contribute to gaps in narratives where we can't properly plot events to maintain the cohesiveness of narratives, whether it be our own or for other people. And while we might make educated guesses that are correct, and many times are indeed correct, sometimes these gaps will cause us to commit errors in implotment, which will in turn cause errors in our interpretation of the event. These errors, if large enough, can cause disagreement. To move ahead with forgiveness, this disagreement and errors must be addressed. In combination with suggestion within forgiveness literature, my research on narrative theory, it was suggested that a sharing of narratives between the parties involved could be helpful in resolving the problem. Since the narrative sharing will take place between two individuals, at least that is in the case that I am examining currently, the narrative sharing will take the form of a discourse. And this allows us to apply the framework of discourse ethics developed by Jürgen Habermas, which provides some useful parameters that will help us better achieve the task at hand. Habermas offers a model of discourse for when problematic truth claims must be examined. This applies fairly straightforwardly to the situation at hand. Discursive examination, as he calls it, involves the use of communicative action. This term denotes how each individual must be truthful in three ways. First, to the observable events that took place. Second, to their own subjective experiences. And three, to the norms that govern the relationship in question. By stipulating these conditions, each person involved in narrative sharing will be able to piece out the relevant information to the particular event, and both parties may find more success in properly implotting and understanding the events that took place. Additionally, by using this framework, we can avoid, for the large part, deceitful and ulterior motives that may corrupt the process involved and prevent forgiveness from taking place. While this framework is useful, I believe, I think it still leaves open the possibility for certain corrupting factors. First is the problem that theoretical frameworks don't always translate neatly to our lived experiences. I have studied many theoretical frameworks within philosophy and cannot seem to apply any of them completely to my personal life, how hard I may try. Second is that this framework still leaves open the possibility for self-deception that may distort our accounts. While both of these were well beyond the scope of my research, however, I still think that the model I have provided has merit. While frameworks are not perfect, they do help us think differently about the situations that we face in our lives. What Habermas's framework does is promote a certain commitment from both parties to reach agreement and resolve the situation at hand. Additionally, what is aimed at ultimately is an agreement over what happened so that forgiveness can take place. While a full correction of errors would be ideal, if the parties can come to a compromise, I believe that forgiveness can still take place. Even if this framework does not resolve the situation completely, it is my understanding that this model will ultimately help in moving parties involved closer to an agreement and aid in forgiveness. Thank you for your attention. I can take a few questions now.
Can you talk more about what you mean by self-deception? The possibility of self-deception?
Sure. So Katie asked about self-deception. Now, this was not really a big part of my paper. I just wanted to acknowledge its possibility. I think that there are certain reasons that it may be convenient to present alternative facts to ourselves. And especially when these things are done without our notice, they can corrupt narratives in ways that we might not realize ourselves. And so by self-deception, I mean a certain deceiving of the self, but I also think that people aren't always aware that they're doing it. So you might not be able to address those things completely, especially if you're unaware that you did that yourself.
I think this idea of narratives that underlie how we view our worldview is really powerful. And I wonder, so I'm thinking of like examples of things that have happened in the community here. So like the rock, for example.
Yes.
And so often we have these very different narratives based on our own personal and cultural experience and our own position in a certain worldview. And they can seem very true because it's based on our own life experience and the structure that we live in. So are there times when it's impossible to come to an understanding when you're coming from two very different narratives? Or, you know, what would you think about that?
That sounds like another research paper. I think, yeah, that would require some further work. I don't have an answer to that. It seems certainly the case that there are many situations where no matter how well we explain ourselves and our situation, the other person just doesn't seem to understand. My intuition is that the other person doesn't want to understand or doesn't want to try to understand. And so I would think that there would need to be a certain receptivity to the narrative, or a move to, okay, put yourself in the other person's shoes and say, why are they saying these things? How can they experience these things? Why is their story so different from my own? And then approaching it from that lens. So I think that it's probably a twofold issue of the person's intentions as well as how well and full they can explain the situation.
Yep. Sort of following up on that, I was wondering, you hear the phrase, let's agree to disagree. Is that actually an agreement that can work in this framework, or did you encounter that, or what are your thoughts about that particular concept?
I think that that's probably a phrase that's applied more to certain opinions on matters. My paper was dealing more with actual events that take place. And so I don't think that in this situation saying let's agree to disagree is actually going to solve the problem, because like I said, if the two people disagree about what happened, then one person is going to be apologizing for one event while the other person is forgiving for a different event, and they don't line up. And at least in my experience, simply saying I forgive you when the other person hasn't understood the depth of the hurt that they have caused me has not allowed me to fully forgive them in a sort of conceptual and maybe emotional sense.
So was there a particular circumstance or situation that inspired you to research?
Yes.
Questions?
Yep.
Could you repeat it, please?
Okay, sure. Yeah, she asked if there was a particular situation in my life that inspired this research. It was something that I had experienced the beginning of last fall, where there was a sort of contextual misunderstanding on the other person's part. And some words were spoken to me that hurt me very deeply. And I tried to explain myself and say, your words were very hurtful, and I want to be friends and I want to forgive you. And so initially, I simply tried to explain myself, and they sort of apologized, but didn't seem to recognize that they had actually done something wrong. And I said, I forgive you, but I found myself somehow not being able to forgive that person or overcome resentment towards that person or return to where we were in our friendships prior to that event. And so I started to feel intuitively that unless I can get the other person to understand the harm that they have done to me and apologize for that, I wouldn't be able to move past it. So that was kind of the circumstances that fueled this research paper. Well, thank you very much for your attention.
So the Bethel University Library will now be holding their annual meeting. You all are welcome to attend the short gathering to learn more about the Friends, and we do want to provide you with an opportunity to join us if you're interested. Thank you very much.